The process of creating an audio version of any story, complete with music and sound effects, is exhausting and time-consuming. I recognize that any quality YouTube video takes time to edit, but Dragon Riders contained 51 segments, each segment averaging longer than 10 minutes. That's approximately 9 hours of critical listening, and I had to go through this story at least 4 times before the whole process was done. 4 times 9, do the math. Needless to say, I've become quite familiar with Night Dragon Zero's story. I'm just gonna call him ND now. So I could probably give a pretty decent commentary at this point. There's a lot to cover though, and I don't know where to begin. I guess I'll do a quick summary, then get the critiques out of the way so that I can move on to the positives. Dragon Riders 2 is, of course, a sequel to its original story, in which a female Pokemon trainer named Chris travels around with her Scyther companion Night Slice and her Charmeleon/Charizard companion Firestorm. In the first story, we learn that Chris was a former rocket agent before she escaped, and the 2 Pokemon were descendants of godly dragons who fell into Team Rocket's clutches, where they met Chris. Throughout their journey, they join up with another trainer named Jade, fight Team Rocket with magic and technology, and encounter a bunch of the Dragon God's servants, the Elemental Dragons. Night Slice turns out to be the evil Dragon God's descendant. Its higher powers cause him to nearly kill Chris. He runs away, and the second story thus begins from his perspective. Desiring to escape his destiny as an evil dragon, Night Slice accepts an offer from one of the evil dragon's former minions to turn human. However, this causes Chris to become a Scyther, and she is promptly captured by Team Rocket. Jade and Firestorm attempt to find her, but they soon switch bodies themselves, and become distracted when another evil organization hunts them. For the entire story, there are 3 separate plot lines told from multiple perspectives. It's not easy to sum up, but put overly simply, here's what the good guys want. Night Slice's objective is to build up enough power to save Chris from his mistake. Chris's objective is to destroy Team Rocket and Silph for their cruelty to Pokemon and people. Firestorm's objective is to reunite the group and return everyone to normal. And now here's what the bad guys want. Team Rocket's objective is to take over the world with the strongest force of Pokemon. Silph Corporation's objective is to clone a bunch of chimeras, part human, part Pokemon, so they will be the strongest. Kaze, the evil dragon's objective is to become one with Night Slice, so that he will be the strongest. And now here's what the neutral guys want. Algard's objective, Night Slice's father, was originally to destroy all humans, though it became only evil humans. The objective of the legendary dragons is simply to pass on their sacred and forbidden skills to Night Slice and Firestorm. They serve a higher power, whose objective remains a mystery. Yeah, it's pretty complicated. During my first read, my excitement for the story turned lukewarm near the end. ND had been good about keeping things fresh and new for most of his fanfic, but the last 1/3 of the plot was repetitive. People get captured, people get rescued, a base blows up. People get captured, people get rescued, a base blows up. Rinse, repeat. Another reason I was less excited about the ending was all the characters that ND was juggling by that point. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have a myriad of characters, but you'd better have the skill and story length of J.R.R. Tolkien if you're going to attempt as many as ND did. Even by the halfway point, I was getting confused on who was who. For instance, I got Serac mixed up with Nala, and when Mirage died, I couldn't even properly feel sad because she'd had so little time in the spotlight. Meanwhile, there were seemingly important characters who showed up just to vanish, such as Ogwell/Lugia and Silph Commander Jubei. Okay, technically Jubei was there at the end, but for an evil mastermind, he got almost no lines. I should know, I gave him a funny voice. Likewise, the Fallen Angel mini-boss appeared out of nowhere. It's like the opposite problem to Lugia's character. He didn't receive any build-up of any kind. He was just suddenly there. Lugia ultimately built up to nothing. What else? Exposition monologues. There weren't many, but now and then you'd have ones that didn't feel natural. The part where Nala is cleaning Chris's wounds, having a one-way conversation with her, is a little too convenient. I get that she needed to spill her guts to someone, but she really went into clarifying detail for someone talking to a Pokemon that couldn't reply. The other standout example of this is when the Rockets are yelling through a megaphone for Night Slice to give up Hazuki because she's a chimera. Yes, they cut off the conversation with "none of your business," but they spill quite a few beans before that. Alright, I'm starting to ramble. Anyway, those were the big things. A couple minor things bugged me as well. You may have picked up on the number of times I used the word begun where began should have gone. That wasn't my fault. Also, not to make a sexist argument, but ND continued a trend where a girl could hit a guy for comedic effect, but the guy could never hit the girl for a similar effect. This is more of a personal thing for me. If men and women are going to hit each other comedically, let it go both ways with an equalizing medium, such as a paper fan. Firestorm was constantly getting slapped by Dracia, and Kiyoe really got kicked around by Isui. Again, this wasn't a significant theme of the story, but having read it 4 times, it got to me. In the spirit of criticism, let me be fair and critique myself as well. My voice acting allows for expression of emotion, but is limited almost to boy and girl voice, and that's it. If not for the mention of the speaker, listeners would have difficulty telling which character I was voicing. Furthermore, the input of sound effects was, at times, repetitive, and they would often drown out the telling of the story for a few seconds. This is my first attempt at this, and I should have made more certain that the sounds were on a more suitable level. Okay, that's enough criticism. Time for the praise. As I've said, Dragon Riders 2 was a story broken into 3 plot lines, all of which were expertly interconnected. Incidentally, this is why I think Phineas and Ferb was such a successful show. Each episode connected the 2 young inventors building stuff, Candace plotting to bust them, and the undercover agent Perry the Platypus. You get to see the same general picture from different angles, and ND gets to show off just how much thought he put into creating this reality. It's always cool to read a point of view story, then discover that there's a much bigger story beyond one's petty cage of reality. That's why I love biblical stories. You get to see the greater good and evil behind everyday situations. Having the evil Kaze and the good Horror-Salt as a backstory puts a lot more meaning into the relationship shared by Nightslice and Firestorm, and makes a suitable catalyst for much of their struggles. By the way, I should mention that not all of this is ND's idea. Pokemon aside, ND seems to have borrowed quite a bit from his colleague, Theo Blitzlung, whom I haven't actually looked into at the time of this recording. Having someone to borrow from and bounce ideas off of is one of the most nourishing things a creative mind can have. Back when this was written in 2002, I myself was also co-authoring roleplay stories on forums with other authors. You relinquish some control of the plot and characters when you do that, but you also gain a motivational drive, knowing that there's someone else who is nearly as invested in the story as you. That incident on the ship comes to mind, where Firestorm was helped by a mysterious man named Des to escape the Rocket and Silph forces. You never saw Des again for the rest of the story, but I get the feeling that was ND giving a nod to Theo. There's still a lot I haven't read, so maybe it was more than that. Overall, ND does a good job of event continuity. That is to say, when stuff happens earlier on, he makes it count later. Either he does this planning ahead of time, or he's a master improviser. There's plenty of examples of this. Jade and Firestorm get switched because they simultaneously step on a dysfunctional warp panel at Silph in the first story. Nightslice is able to make Chris human again because Euphoria's transformation power was the only one that didn't get lost in the Kaze fight. Scantrix gets several mentions early on, once by Nala when ranting about her dad, once by Allegard during the fight above the volcano, and when he's revealed, the reader can go, "Oh!" out of recognition. Nothing seems to be made up as it goes, and I respect an author with foresight. Probably my favorite aspect of the story was how ND manipulated the good guys into fighting each other. This was no contrived Batman vs. Superman forced conflict. Firestorm had to defeat Nightslice to get the keycard to save his friends, and all the while, he didn't even know that he was fighting his comrade. On the other hand, when Nightslice fought Chris, he knowingly stood against her because Hazuki's life hung in the balance. Each time, the fights had a satisfying ending that contributed meaningfully to the plot. Let's see, what else? Another thing I'd like to mention is the influence I noticed in ND's writing from other works of the time. I chose Heart of Sword from Rurouni Kenshin to be the opening soundtrack because Night Dragon himself actually placed it in his writing script during the battle between Chris and Nightslice. As a 90s kid myself, I have an appreciation for references like those. I suspect there were several allusions to Final Fantasy VIII, such as the counter-rocket skill, the invasion of Silph, Galbadian, forces, and fighting legendary creatures to gain their powers. Okay, maybe not just Final Fantasy VIII, but certainly something similar. Then of course we have the Transformer song, the Terminator robot incident, and, Well, actually, I'm not sure what Ashura and Luminar were referencing, but there have got to be a couple of others that I failed to recognize that some of you will. See, switching gears, Dragon Riders 2 was an emotional roller coaster. Andy did an excellent job of working the spectrum of human and Pokemon emotions. I know this better than most, because before starting the project, I downloaded about 100 of Kevin MacLeod's royalty-free musical tracks. They were labeled by emotion: happy, upbeat, mystical, reflective, dark, spooky, sad, aggressive, suspenseful, and so on. Since it was an action story, I found myself using mostly aggression soundtracks, but the others got plenty of attention too. Andy was also remarkable about the time he took for each part. He wasn't too brief, nor did he drag stuff out, and I found that the music often complemented the action and emotion. When the song reached its climax, the action was at its pinnacle as well, and when the action stopped, it was right around the time the music stopped as well. They blended better than I could have dared to hope, and it brought a whole new dimension to the epic. A fanfiction starts out as nothing but an idea in a person's head. Then it becomes words. The more creative it is, the more people who read it, the more real it becomes. My goal was to make Dragon Riders as real as I could, by giving it everything short of an animated movie. I couldn't have gotten it to work if Andy wasn't already such a good writer. On a scale of 1 to 10, where would I put this story? Well, my scale is not limited to fanfiction alone, but placed in the context of all the stories I've ever read. Harry Potter, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings, the Halo books, the Redwall Saga, etc. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Dragon Riders reads like a professional novel, and would absolutely have a place on any library bookshelf. It's still not as epic as Phoenix Rising, in my opinion, but I was 14 when I read it, and it definitely rubbed off on my writing style. I hope you guys enjoyed the story as much as I did, and you can always read more like it at the Pokemon Tower Best in Category Awards.